I would just say to like every person out there is listening that's thinking about starting a business, go for it. Because if you don't start that business, you risk losing out on all that upside and all that gain, that knowledge, experience, people, and hopefully at the end of the day, a big pile of money. But like, even if you don't get that, you're going to get that knowledge, people you'll meet, experiences that you never would have had otherwise. It's like, what do you risk by not going and taking that leap?
Welcome to From the Ground Up, the podcast where we delve deep into the inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and their journey to build successful startups. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, and in each episode, I sit down with the founders to learn about their experiences, the challenges they faced, the lessons they've learned, and the insights they've gained while turning their dreams into reality. Today, we'll be delving into the inspiring story of Pieter Fossel, the co-founder of Hydrosat, a $35 million funded startup whose major pivot came from the unthinkable, the unfortunate passing of his co-founder, and in that moment, how it changed the company, his life, and the mission behind his leadership as CEO. So what does Hydrosat do? Hydrosat, which launched technology into space aboard the Falcon 9 rocket, is helping government agencies better predict wildfires, predict droughts, and helping farmers produce better crop yields through the use of data. And that data comes from thermal infrared imagery. If that's a new concept to you, think of it as the temperature fingerprint of our planet. It's a powerful tool for understanding and protecting our environment. It's big business in a rapidly changing world, and honored to share Pieter's fascinating story with you today. Welcome to the show, Pieter.
Jake, thanks so much for having me.
Well, welcome here, and excited to really learn about you and about what you've created and the value that it's bringing to hopefully everybody. Pieter is a graduate from Georgetown, holds an MBA from Dartmouth, was honored by Forbes Next 1000 Entrepreneurs in 2021. And we're happy to have him share his story with us today. Water and food are two of the most needed requirements to survive. We'll get to know how you're helping us do that, but tell us a little bit first about where you're from, Pieter, and where you grew up.
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. So I spent a lot of time of my upbringing growing up out west. Predominantly, my family was based in Wyoming and Montana. And for anyone who's spent, time in those, parts of the country, that water issues are really, really at core part of daily life. I heard somewhere recently, which I'll just paraphrase, and I'll take it and use it here. But whiskey is for drinking, and water is for fighting. That certainly is, the ethos in places where I spent a lot of time growing up, because water is so important. So, driving between, Wyoming and Montana, you're passing through really one of the bigger potato baskets of the country and the world. Major, region exporting, potatoes. All of those are irrigated. And so as you are driving for hours, you're going to see, on both sides of the road, center pivot irrigated fields. And, that's a lot of water going in to grow, really important crop in the region, which is then, being eaten all over the country and really exported all over the world. And none of it would be possible without irrigation and without water. And the other thing that we see a lot, particularly in the summertime, are wildfires. So, that's either, impacting us locally. I remember one day I was picking up my fiance at the time, now wife, at the airport, and driving her back to my parents' house. And there's all this, smoke and sirens all of a sudden, and it popped up really out of nowhere. And then we could see, that this brush fire had broken out on the hillside, not too far from our car where we were driving around. So we actually, we ended up getting stuck in town. We couldn't make it to my parents' house for several hours until, the local authorities came and, really put that fire out, which included, helicopters coming in, dousing that blaze, fire trucks putting in a, good fire line. So, when we talk about things like wildfire, it's not just a statistic for a lot of people. And it certainly was the case, for me. I mean, these are things that, we saw and experienced, in, I don't want to say day-to-day life, but certainly, once every couple of years. And even when there wasn't, an actual fire, near one of our communities, most of them, thankfully, that were around us got put out pretty quickly. But every year, the air is filled with smoke, July through September. And so all of the fires in California to Oregon, all that smoke gets blown, across big parts of the country. And, you can smell it in the air. It literally hangs with you. So it's almost impossible to not think about some of these issues, which, I think for a lot of people kind of are these esoteric, impacts of climate change issues. But at least, where I grew up and where I spent a lot of time, Jake, these are things you can't not think about, because you smell that smoke in the air. And so in a lot of ways, climate change, impacts of climate change are, very real, and they're very tangible for us. And so that, all of those experiences really shaped my upbringing and how I thought about, what are some of the major, challenges, really, I guess, that I wanted to address and try to take on, even if in a small way, during my life. And so, climate change writ large was something that, I'm very interested in from a young age. But really for me within that, looking at some of these water issues, water as it impacts our food system, and how we can, grow food even in drought environments, how we can do that sustainably, because certainly growing up in a dry area, that means a lot. But then also, how water and availability of water is impacting, fire risk. And, that again was something that, was very important to me. So, all of these experiences growing up, I think really, really impacted me and impacted my interest in, what I wanted to work on. And, I think all of that laid foundation for what would eventually become Hydrosat.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I love that backstory. I know that fires were from Northern California, and, it seems like they're just getting bigger and more often. And, we see the planes flying over, dropping water and different agents to help put it out. But yeah, it's absolutely an issue. To be inspired at such a young age, those are big global problems to try and tackle. And technology certainly is helping do that. And we'll get into how your company and your product's doing that. Proximity when you grow up oftentimes shapes also the type of industry you work in. So being, in Wyoming or Montana, I could see where that would help shape your understanding of the environment. Getting into the industry is probably a little bit different path. The other thing that's really, I think, transformative, or more importantly, influences you are your parents. When I say your parents, and I'm going to take a guess here, I might be wrong. Dodie and John, are those relatives?
So that would be my my aunt and uncle.
Okay. So with that, those relatives there, and part of kind of what you're involved with, talk to us a little bit about the conservation and kind of what you do there, because I think it's interesting to me to understand your involvement at, call it land, call it preservation, call it whatever makes sense. But in terms of what's your process there with engaging with them, with their big property and what they're doing with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. So, I will say, like so many people, who have moved and settled the West, throughout the history of our country, we not originally come from there. So my family, originally started in the New York area, and then migrated and settled out west as I was growing up. And so one of the things, and one of the big draws, for them was really the outdoors and nature and the beautiful landscapes and everything that comes with it that the Rocky Mountains has to offer. So when my father and his 4 older brothers were growing up in I'll say rural to suburban New York State, they grew up spending a lot of time outside in the forests, fishing, hiking, right in their backyard. But anyone else, like myself, was born in that area, that it's you are right in the thick of urbanization and urban sprawl. And so I think for them, they had a real calling to get out west where they could have these big open landscapes where they could have access to nature. But once you have that passion and that interest and spark, I think at an early age, it never really dies out. And then when you see those beautiful places and you see them, teeming with wildlife, and for my family, that really meant at the time, migratory corridors for things like elk. You tend to want to preserve them. You tend to want to make sure that those areas and that wildlife and that landscape is going to be around for the future. And so actually my Uncle John started something called the Jack Creek Preserve. So basically there's a really important migratory corridor between 2 national forest lands that was private and was going to be, that's an area, frankly, it's right near several ski resorts and golf course developments were coming up in that area. And so he had this idea of, hey, why don't we take this relatively small piece of land that's kind of a bridgestone or a keystone area that could connect, and is an important migratory corridor to connect these 2 pieces of preserved national forests. What if we took that and set it aside under conservation easement and turned it into a preserve, so that in perpetuity that area would be undeveloped and would be left for the land and for the wildlife, such as elk, to be able to safely cross through between those 2 national forests. And so that's something that my family's been very involved with. I've had the good fortune to maintain a very close connection to Montana and the Rockies generally, and so I've maintained my involvement in that preserve as well. But that's like a very tangible, on the ground, hey, here's a hyper local way that we can get involved and have a small impact in a local area on a much bigger ecosystem. And so it's almost a microcosm for my own motivations with Hydrosat, where I'm hoping that we can have a bigger impact on a much bigger swath of ecosystems, leveraging space and leveraging satellite technology, but really towards a lot of these same land and water issues, which really aren't going away, and frankly are becoming more and more relevant, more and more important.
Hiring globally can open the door to vast talent pools, but knowing where to look can take time. Paperwork can be complex, and it's costly if you get it wrong. We help founders hire remotely across 5 continents and in 50 different countries, and we do it in 3 steps. First, we listen to your company's story, the core skills required for the role, and why it would be great to work there. Second, we tell that story globally across multiple candidate channels we've developed over 10 years. And third, we schedule candidate interviews within 48 hours. Hiring from different cultures can be complex, takes time, and there's no guarantee a candidate's the right fit once they're on board. That's why we take additional steps to give you peace of mind it's the right fit once you make the hire, and give you 6 months to make sure you've gotten it right. There's a whole world out there. Why not hire anywhere? It can save you time and potentially save you labor costs as you scale. For a limited time, we're offering a $5,000 credit towards your first hire, and if it's not a fit over the course of 6 months, will replace them absolutely free or give you your money back. Go to matchrelevant.com and claim your offer with promo code MATCH2023. Let's kind of get into your background a little bit here with the company. Was Hydrosat your first startup?
That's actually a great question, Jake. So I'm tempted to say yes because it really is the first company that I've been involved with. Founding. My co-founder Royce had started a technology company, a technology services company back during the .com era. But this was the first. Hydrosat's really the first company that I was involved with starting. The reason for my hesitation and pause is that it's probably the third or maybe fourth, company idea that I had really kicked around with a group of, co-founders, potential co-founders. But this was the first one that actually got us to, take that real entrepreneurial plunge, if you will. And that's something that I think that is probably a really common thread line for a lot of your series that your listeners will be will resonate with. But this was the first company where I said, hey, let's do the crazy thing. Let's quit our jobs. Let me tell my girlfriend I'm going to go without, now wife. Thankfully, she stuck with me throughout all that. Let's tell her that I'm going to go without a salary for 6 months. 1 year ended up being 2 years. So it's always a little longer, always a little harder than it's going to be. But this was the first real idea where we said, okay, let's actually turn this into a business. Let's quit our jobs, and they were and let's take the plunge and really build something here. And I think that's regardless of what kind of business you're building, whether it's a software business, a hardware business, whether it's a space business or a very terrestrial, day-to-day, human business. I don't know. That's a common thing that every entrepreneur goes through. It's like, okay, we're going to really do it this time, and it's going to be this, and we're going to do this crazy thing that will probably fail. And all the statistics and data says it will fail, but let's take a winger on it. Let's try it anyway. And that was 4 years ago, and I'm just so glad that I set out on that journey, as I'm sure many of the other people you talk to feel the same way.
Yeah, that's great. When you went from a management consultant focused in the space sector, talk about how you went from that to the idea that you said, I think there's something we could do that maybe isn't being done today, do it better, serve a different client base. Walk us through that a little bit. How did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll spend just a brief minute talking about, my management consulting background.
Yeah.
Not because I think it's there's a million paths to entrepreneurship, but for us, for my co-founder and I, this was a really important, breeding ground, for Hydrosat, because we worked together, actually, my co-founder and I, at this management consulting firm called Avocent. It's now part of Oliver Wyman. But we did strategy consulting work, growth strategy, M&A diligence for aerospace companies. And so we worked a lot in the sector. We worked a lot with, everything from space launch to satellite manufacturing to satellite communication services, connectivity on aircraft, to remote sensing, which is, of course, what Hydrosat, that's kind of the part of the space sector that Hydrosat is part of, is, what we call the remote sensing or Earth observation, geospatial analytics sector. And so working in consulting, you have the great, I guess it's a privilege and a curse, but you get to see a lot of different companies in different sectors. You get to see a lot of different business models. You get to see what works and what doesn't work, which is great if you are, on the hunt for, an idea, and, a problem to solve, and, marrying that up with, a way to solve it. And, for that kind of aspect, that more analytical aspect of starting a business. But what, I think both my co-founder and I found was when we were working on these consulting projects, we'd get to do something really cool for a really cool client. And then 3 months later it'd be over, right? And we'd, turn over the proverbial PowerPoint deck, the keys to the car, and say, hey, good luck with that. I hope you come back and hire us. And I hope, in the future, with the next time you have some exciting, challenge you want help with. But you never get that satisfaction of, the follow through. What happened next? What happened after the consultants, left the room, so to speak? And so, that's where the itching, of the entrepreneur, I think, really, really comes in. And so my co-founder and I, one of the places that we spent a lot of time was at NASA, which was just down the road from our office in Washington, D.C. It's a great place called NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Fantastic group of engineers and scientists working for NASA on some of the coolest, things that NASA does, in my opinion. Doesn't get as much press as, the human spaceflight things, that SpaceX works on. But they do a lot of NASA's Earth science work. So, when we talk about, measuring climate change, we talk about, mapping the Earth, things that are really practical for, farmers, for, wildland firefighters, for urban planners. A lot of that, information that really, our economy runs on, comes right out of places like NASA Goddard. And so we were there, we were visiting with one of the engineers that built the thermal, I'm going to get a little sciencey here, and I promise it'll be hopefully the last time, the thermal infrared sensor that goes on the Landsat satellite that NASA puts up. And what it basically, the way I think about a thermal infrared sensor is it's a form of remotely taking the temperature of an object. So most of us have come in contact with these. If you remember the pandemic, you'd come into a restaurant or maybe an airport and someone would stick, this little temperature, gun, at you from a distance and, take your temperature. That's, same idea, basically. You're remotely measuring the temperature of the surface of an object, whether it's your forehead or the Earth, from a distance. And that's exactly what this engineer had built, was this really exquisite, thermal infrared sensor that went on this satellite, at 700 kilometers, above the Earth, and it's measuring the surface temperature of the Earth every day. And so he was showing us, how this worked in the lab. And he had two houseplants, just like, grandma might have. They looked identical to us. They were both green, leafy. Okay, great. It's a plant. Checks out, right? And then he showed us on the video monitor what these two seemingly identical plants looked like through his thermal imager. And we could actually see that they were not the same at all. One of them was cool, and so it kind of showed up as this sort of greenish blue color, really healthy looking. And one, had all these yellow, red, splotches all over it. And so these plants that looked identical to the naked eye, we could tell one was, a lot hotter than the other. And that's the one that, he hadn't been watering. So that's the one that had been, starved of water. Looked identical, but these plants were having totally different life experiences, and they were going to have totally different outcomes if those experiences continued. The one that was a lot hotter was eventually going to wilt, die. The one that was well watered was going to continue to grow. And so it was kind of for us this, aha moment of, hey, how valuable would that be? Would that information be to, the irrigation sector, to the broader, food security questions, to things like wildfire risk, where you have dry vegetation versus wet, healthy vegetation? How valuable would knowing that be, in real time, everywhere on the planet. And instead of having one NASA satellite, that's, $1 billion or whatever, what if we could take that same technology, miniaturize it, put it on a fleet of what we call in the industry CubeSats, but essentially, standardized, small, cheaper, more cost-effective satellites, and provide that same information on a daily basis everywhere on Earth. And that really was, where, at least for me, and my co-founder, Royce, the concept for Hydrosat was born. It's like, let's do this really hard thing that NASA's doing, and let's do it commercially. And let's do it at 16 times the scale, and let's see if we can have a really huge impact with it. And that was 4 years ago, and we've been working essentially towards that vision ever since.
So your technology is currently in space, and it's providing imagery and data that comes back to your platform or your systems, and then you're able to utilize that to provide to potential customers making better decisions, whether it's a farmer or someone who's looking at heat maps or waterways that they have to understand through better data. Is that kind of the idea?
That's the idea. So we have our own satellite constellation that we're launching. So the first two of our own satellites are going to go up next year. What we've done first, because we're in business to solve problems, right? So a satellite is great. It's sexy. We can put it on a satellite itself. It's not sexy, but people think these, launch events, you put something on a rocket, that's sexy, right? That gets a lot of attention. But for us, we really wanted to start with the customer and the problem. And so we actually developed our first product was really a software product. It was really an analytics product that pulled a bunch of different sources of satellite data that's already out there from various government sensors, pulled that together, processed, fused and analyzed it in a unique way. And then it's those insights that we've been providing to our users. And then next year, we'll have the first of our own satellites to feed into that, which is just going to make the system even better, even more reliable, higher resolution, so we can really get down to those, real field scale farmer issues around irrigation, and much more, frequent.
That's great. Yeah, when I hear about space, you immediately think of SpaceX, you think of Elon Musk, you think of Jeff Bezos, and then you read their biographies, and it seems like space was deep into their DNA as little kids. But from your perspective, how much was space part of your thoughts growing up? Did it have a place in your mind about someday you wanted to be there, or what was the path from getting to the sector that you got into when you had options to decide as a management consultant?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you ask my co-founder Royce, he has been a space guy, through and through since the Challenger the disaster, where I think a lot of the world back in the 80s when that happened, started waking up and saying, hey, well, why are we sending people to space? And so he actually had the opposite, reaction to that. He said, well, hey, space is destiny. Space is the future. Like, we need to be there. And so that got him, writing a lot about space and eventually pulled him into the space sector. So he's been a space guy through and through from the beginning. For me, I've always actually been interested in the environment, water issues. And so when I was in university, when I was at Georgetown, I did my kind of capstone, senior research work all around, water stress in agriculture. And at the time, I was really interested in desalination. That was going to be that was my solution. Let's boil the ocean. It's funny that I became a management consultant. That's what they say not to do, right? But okay, can we boil all that ocean water, make it from salt water to fresh water and use that? And so those were kind of the angles that I was exploring. And there are places, like Cyprus, where they actually do that for a lot of their water supply. They literally, desalinate, seawater and use it to irrigate lemons and oranges and things that Cyprus grows, and maybe given their amount of rainfall, question maybe they shouldn't be growing those, but it's take a lot of water. But those were the kind of issues that I was interested in. And then for me, I didn't actually think I'd have an opportunity to work on those issues, those water issues, using space. For me, I got into management consulting knowing that, I wanted to do something, business related. Seemed like a good place to start a career because I could, get a sort of generalist business background. It's kind of a lot of the, first job, school leaver type, draws. But I was really interested in aviation. That was kind of my other passion. And from an early age, I'd wanted to be a pilot. I'd gone to school. My, middle school was next to an airport. And so, I was the kid that was like, have the ball hit him in the face at soccer practice because he'd be looking at the planes taking off, and getting yelled at by the coach. So like, I wanted to be a pilot, and like, if I couldn't be a pilot because my parents wanted me to go into business, okay, then, darn it, I'll be a management consultant and I'll work with aerospace companies that build planes and landing gears and engines and all that stuff. And that's what I did. And that's what brought me to Avocent. But then I met my co-founder, Royce, and he's the one that got me into space. He said, okay, forget about, planes. I know that's, interesting, but, space is the future. Space is destiny. And there's so much that we can do with space to help, life here on Earth. And that's when the wheels started spinning for me. And I started connecting, what we could do with satellites as a platform and with space as a vantage point to address some of these, water related issues that I'd always been interested in. And so for me, it was kind of bringing everything full circle, but it took the influence of my co-founder, to do that for me.
That's great. You brought up your co-founder, Royce, a few different times. I think that finding co-founders is maybe one of the toughest and most important decisions when you build a business. How did you guys meet?
Yeah, absolutely. So we met working at this consulting firm together. So it was a really great culture. I mean, it was kind of a very serious about work, but everyone was friends. It was kind of one of those small team environments where everyone really got along. And so I actually became friends with my co-founder, Royce, long before we ever had an opportunity to work together. But we really hit it off. We shared a lot of mutual interests. We were obviously working on in the sector on the same kind of stuff. And like me, Royce, wanted to start a company, and he had that entrepreneurial experience before, but it'd been over a decade. And for me, I knew right from the get-go. I probably said, in the first, happy hour drinks conversation I ever had with him was like, yeah, like my time here is ultimately short. What I really want to do is start a business. And he was like, oh yeah, me too. Like, and so we always had that, shared ambition of starting a company. And so then when we had this opportunity that we really found together, it was like, okay, perfect. This is our chance. What could go wrong? Worst case is, in 6 months, we will have failed, and I'm sure we can get, jobs back in consulting. And, 6 months became a year, and then, 2 years, and then 4. And, here we are, post Series A with, a team of, just under 30 people. And it's been a really, really wild ride.
That's great. When you go out and raise funds for the first time, and a lot of listeners out there are looking at doing that in this market, trying to do it. And with your background, what was the resources or the experience in business or maybe business school, what was it that helped you think, succeed in not just starting a company, but actually maybe the more important, harder part is to raise the capital?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jake. And it's kind of is where everyone wants to spend time and ask questions, right? Because oh, I could shoot for the moon if only I had the money, right? And so that's a natural place to start, and it's kind of where we started too, because you can have a great idea, you can turn that idea into a business plan and a 100-page. For us, it was slides because again we were consultants, so into your 100-slide, 200-slide deck, it keeps getting longer, but you're not going to be able to hire anybody, build anything, let alone build a satellite and put it on orbit without capital, right? So it's the natural place to start. I'd say, for anyone that starts a business, not just for the fundraising part of it, but for absolutely everything else that is unexpected that you'll encounter along the way, like the number one, thing you need to get comfortable with is, like getting over fear of rejection, right? So that is essentially all fundraising is you are constantly, putting your baby out there in the world. Hey, this is something that I quit my job over. This is something that I have put my heart and soul into. And here it is, and you have to be okay with getting, 40 no's, to get that one yes that starts the whole process. And the truth is, once you get that one yes, the rest of fundraising, changes tremendously. It becomes a lot easier to get the second yes and the third yes. And then you've got a round together, you close that, you get some press, and now you're actually, a company with resources that can actually execute on that vision. And then after that, I mean, people talk about it all the time, traction. Like nothing attracts capital like progress, right? And so if you're able to make progress, then that can really change the equation and make it easier. But in terms of what anyone out there that's looking to fundraise, just getting really comfortable with networking, with getting the invariable, like big long list of no's, because that's just part of it, And so when I look at my background and my experience in consulting, probably the only thing that was a direct parallel was when I was a very junior analyst, we had to do a lot of primary research, which meant, getting on the phone and calling, people to try to get them to give us an interview for free so we could learn, something differentiated on a topic. And so it's essentially like cold calling for sales, except you're not trying to sell a product. You're trying to get someone who doesn't want to talk to you to stick on the phone with you for an hour and tell you a lot of, really detailed information about something that they may not want to talk to a stranger about. And so you get a lot of rejections when you do that. You have to get comfortable with, okay, here's my list. I researched all these people that I want to talk to, and then I'm just going to, send that email, send that cold email, make that cold call. And so it's that getting comfortable with the no's that's important. But then the other thing I learned, because I hated primary research, I hated that process, right? And so I said, okay, well, this is stupid. My manager wants me to make these 100 phone calls. What if I, use LinkedIn and try to find that second or third connection, where I can get someone to introduce me to somebody that works at that company, and so then I've got a warm introduction. So we spent a lot of time getting creative about how we could get, that friendly introduction into the place you wanted to talk to, or the person that we wanted to talk to. And fundraising is the same way. And, VCs and every VC blog you'll read will say the same thing. Because with VCs, you don't cold email them, you don't cold call them. You do exactly what we were doing for our primary research. You find that person, Jake, that, is willing to make that intro for you. And then you show up with, a warm introduction. And it could be anybody. And so we went through our combined Rolodexes, so to speak. I've never had a Rolodex. I'm, 31, but, it's like, does Aunt Bethany know anyone that she used to work with like 30 years ago that, might know somebody, to talk to? So I'll give you a great example. You brought up my parents early on. So my father, like, again, probably 40 years ago, he was a loan officer for a bank at that time in his career. And he used to make loans to irrigation equipment companies, including, some of the biggest ones in Nebraska. And so like he knew a guy that then became the CFO of one of these companies and then retired, but he still knew him like 40 years later. And so, you make those wacky connections, and, that's how you find customers. That's how you fundraise when you're starting out, when you are literally nobody but, an idea and a PowerPoint deck and hopefully, one or two co-founders. And so it's just getting creative and being unafraid of the no, and then being determined to stick with it. That's the other big thing is, I think a lot of companies would get off the ground if their founders, stuck it out and didn't give up. And so you've got to be a little crazy or, a little determined, or be having a lot of fun with what you're doing. But because, it's you got to put in the time, and, there's very few overnight successes out there.
How many times did you pitch before you actually got your first seed fund, or seed round rather? And then when you finally got your A round, what was that experience like?
I've lost track of the numbers, but, you brought up, okay, what was it like fundraising in this environment? I'll just kind of rewind the clock back to what we were dealing with at the time. So we, I think we got our very first, well, actually before we'd ever raised any outside capital, the first, money that came into the company was a grant. So we actually got, a grant from the US government, which, funded us early on. And then we got, a slightly larger one. There was a follow-on. And so we started to kind of pull some supporters together and then some customers before we ever had taken in outside capital. But then, we went through this Techstars accelerator program, which, connected us to a lot of people, and we were launching this, brand new seed round right after that. And it was really exciting, because it was, January 2020, and, we had a whole year in front of us and the sky was going to be the limit. And then, what happened in March, but COVID. And so we had all these, great conversations, and then all of a sudden, massive uncertainty. And markets, if there's one thing markets don't like, whether it's, war or inflation or, the debt limit is the crisis du jour right now as we're speaking. Hopefully it'll be resolved before, before anyone's listening to this. Markets hate uncertainty. And COVID was probably the most uncertain thing that had happened in any of our lifetime at that time, right? And so no deals got done for probably, 3 to 6 months. And so that took just a major, wind out of our sails. And, I think like a lot of other people, we weren't sure that, we were going to make it. Thankfully, we had really good support from the customers we did have, which at the time was the U.S. Air Force and the European Space Agency. And so, they really worked with us to help us, through that time. And we're very, very, good and understanding. We had some great people there that we worked with that, really helped. But then, lo and behold, we went out of this period of uncertainty. It was probably seemed like the sky had fallen and no one was going to get any deals done, into, maybe one of the best fundraising environments that we've had, at least in my lifetime, where, all of a sudden, deals were happening again. And so we went through this real roller coaster before we finally got, our first, seed round closed. And so, there is that kind of feeling where, okay, you've now got venture backing. You have some smart people behind you, capital behind you. You can actually go out and, hire people, expand your team, to progress your product, to serve your customers. Like, things are actually moving now. And so that's, a tremendously exciting feeling. And it's a huge relief for about, 30 minutes until you realize that you are now responsible to this group of really smart people who have put money into your company. And now you've got to actually, execute. And so, that kind of, like Jeff Bezos says, every day is day zero. That clock just gets reset to zero when you're an entrepreneur pretty much every single day, by necessity. So going from there to where we are now, post Series A, I'd say, no change. Like, there's not ever, I think in this journey that, like, oh, okay, now we finally made it state. It's just, okay, well, we've gotten through that milestone, and now, what's next? Like, what's the next, hill to climb, so to speak, the next objective? Because every time, yes, you've got more supporters, you've got, more attention, you've got more resources, ability to, produce that traction, hire people, build products, serve customers. But every time, the stakes also increase a little bit. And so, there is never that, maybe there is, for those that, sell a company, although I'm sure that's a different set of emotions entirely. But when you are fundraising, great, you finish the fundraise, but now you got to execute, and then you got to think about the next fundraise. And so it is, a constantly evolving process. And so there isn't like a big relief moment, at least not one that I've found yet. It's energizing, but it's not, there's not a whole lot of time to stop and celebrate. And that's actually something that I wish we did more of, because when you stop and you think about, where you are today versus where you were, a year ago or 2 years ago, you can actually, look around your company and be like, wow, like, none of these people were here. And, these are people that I learned from. These are people that know their jobs like 100 times better than I could do it. Like, what would this company be like without them? And, then you remember that not that long ago, it was just two of you with no resources and no team members. And so it's kind of those moments that I think every founder should try to spend more time celebrating and thinking about.
Yeah, I know that as a company grows, it's hard to remember about perspective and also progress. If you look back, you could see where you started, where you're at today. And I think it's important not just to celebrate it, but also take some time away and think about, like, wow, what have we really done here? And I think it all goes back to the people around you and the ones you bring on board, because they transform the business. If you talk to almost every business leader that's built something successful, the number one thing they always say is our assets are our people. And it goes back to, what type of product are you building, the purpose, the mission, and what can you provide as they join the company. So I know those are really important things to think about as you go through your journey. Let's talk a little bit about your product. It looks like you can do a lot of things. You're in space, you're images, you're providing insights and data to various sectors. I want to just pick one, and I'm just going to pick one that I can relate to personally. I used to drive tomato trucks in college in California, which is a huge industry. That company, when I started, was two guys out of college that started this trucking company to haul tomatoes. And it was 16 hours a day at the time, 12 to 16 hours. We made $1,000 a week. It was over the summer. It was great. And everybody traveled after this, and they used that money to do that. So you spent no money. You lived at this tomato plant, tons of water, tons of water for tomato plants and for those type of crops. So I understand that a little bit in terms of the value of water for a farmer, for example. If you're in middle America if you own land anywhere and you're growing something, how does your technology or your data help them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question, Jake. And I love the tomato trucking experience. That's phenomenal. I bet
And
that was a really, really fun time.
By the way, not to cut you off, that company, those two guys that started that company, they're worth $700 million today.
Great. We should stop doing what we're doing and do that, all of us, right?
Yeah, it was crazy.
But yeah, so I will answer your question, but I'll take the long view. So I'm gonna take us back, just about 8,000 years, which is when humans as a species started irrigating, right? And so this was probably one of the most pivotal moments, in human history. Was this moment 8,000 years ago that, unfortunately, probably didn't get recorded. We don't know the names of the early people that, figured this out, but without a doubt, this was one of, probably after, right up there, I'd say, with, figuring out how to use fire. However much longer ago than that, humans figured fire out. This moment, about 8,000 years ago, when we figured out how to harness water to cultivate food, that was a major pivotal moment, for us as a species. Because what did it allow us to do, right? We moved from being, hunter-gatherers that were really living on the land, but very dependent on, migration of. Here we have to talk about migration of wildlife again, but. Who are, dependent on migration of wildlife and really exposed to, natural world, and had to spend almost all of our waking hours and calories doing things like hunting and gathering, which is very time intensive, without a whole lot of probability of success, kind of like fundraising, right? You got to get out there and, do it every day without a guarantee of a kill in order to bring something home, for the village. But what irrigation allowed us to do was to form towns and harness land and build communities around it, which was really the start, whether this was, in Mesopotamia at the time, modern day Middle East, with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, it was this ability to do this that really was the formation of human civilization. And without the ability to irrigate, to cultivate land, to grow more food in a very condensed, space, we never would have been able to develop, towns and then cities and ultimately civilizations. And all of us that aren't involved in farming directly, myself included, we do whatever we do. I'm a space entrepreneur. You've got a business and a podcast. Not all of us would be out hunting right now were it not for this irrigation revolution that started about 8,000 years ago. So we fast forward to today, a lot of the same, issues are at play. Like, we would not be able to feed 8 billion people and counting were it not for irrigation. It's okay. Not all land is irrigated, but when you look at productive agriculture, highly productive agriculture, and the growth of anticipated, agricultural productivity in the future, we're mostly growing food in areas where we have a lot of sun. Areas that have a lot of sun tend not to have a lot of rain, right? It's kind of like you can't have one, you can't have sun and rain at the same time. So water has to come from somewhere, and so it either has to be brought in as surface water, or it has to be pumped out of the ground and sprayed on the fields with those, mechanized center pivot irrigation, equipment that I drove by growing up, and that are so prevalent in modern agriculture. And so if we think about the modern farmer, same rules, enablers, and constraints apply as 8,000 years ago. You can't grow food without water. and you want to be able to grow the most food as possible in that land that you've got to work. And now the challenge is you want to grow the most food as possible with the fewest inputs possible. And so water in most places in the United States and most places in the world is free. We don't pay for it necessarily, except it's not free, right? It's a finite resource. It's scarce, and there's a cost. If there isn't the direct cost to buy it, there's a direct cost to pump it out of the ground and to spray it on your fields, and that is mostly borne as electricity cost. And in a lot of places, that electricity is coming from a diesel generator, and so that's not just an electricity cost; it's a fuel cost. And that fuel consistently, it's been getting more and more expensive, particularly the last couple of years with the war in Ukraine, major volatility in fuel prices. And when you are growing, depending on where you are and what you're growing, if you're growing a crop that might not have such great margins to begin with, any change, to your input costs, electricity, fuel, water, is going to have a huge impact on your ability to generate a profit, if you're able to generate a profit at all. And so when we think about, hey, how can we, help the farmer, it's allowing them to solve that equation just a little bit better with better information. And so, answering that age-old, 8,000-year-old question, how can we grow more food right here with the inputs we've got, or less inputs for that same amount of food or more food? And so when we think about our information product at Hydrosat, that's exactly what we do. Our goal is to help growers grow more food with less water. And we do that through, irrigation optimization, or providing farmers the tools to make better decisions. We give them the data, they make the decisions. That's the way it works today. And for us, that information comes from satellite. And so we are measuring the temperature of the earth, temperature of those fields, and that gives us moisture stress. And so, from that temperature and that moisture stress, we can then, provide the information needed to make a really efficient irrigation decision that can help that grower grow more food with less, electricity, fuel, and ultimately, water.
And when you say make a better irrigation decision, is that about where the canals of water are going to be piped through, or what's the decisions they need to make with your data that will help them?
Yeah, so it kind of comes back to that early aha moment at NASA that my co-founder Royce and I had, where just looking at your fields, it might all look green, but some regions of it, some sectors, maybe a particular row is under stress, and that stress is showing up as temperature, and we're measuring that, from the satellite using the thermal camera. And so if first of all, whether or not your field is experiencing stress, and how intense that is, and then next order would be, where in your field are you experiencing stress? Because fields are not homogeneous. You might have an area that needs more irrigation, one area needs more irrigation than another, or maybe you've been irrigating your field all along, but you've got a hose line on your irrigation system that's busted, and you might not realize that, because all the pressure valves say no problem, water's going out. But if you know that certain sector of your field is consistently not getting the amount of irrigation that the meters say it should be, that's valuable, because that's a part of that field that you can make a pretty quick fix, and you could have a huge change in outcome in your end of season harvest, if you know that you've got that broken sprinkler line there, just as an example.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
It's really practical things.
It sounds like you can make real tactical decisions too within the field. And it resonates with me, because I remember driving out, as a truck driver. This is only during the summer times when I was going to San Diego State, and it was only for university students that could drive these 18 wheelers, 50,000, I think it was like 50,000 pounds of tomatoes. But they would send you out through dispatch to a field, and within that field, some farmers were just very productive. The yields, the profits they could make out of their land was better than the one that was next door to it. And I never understood why the tomatoes grew better with this landowner versus the other one. And it sounds like a lot of it probably came down to water supply, maybe how they were managing their crop. But if I was to go out to the farmer that wasn't doing great and give him a product or a solution or information that said, if you look at this, it's going to tell you exactly what you can change to be more profitable, that to me would be a very fun conversation to have. And so when you think about your business, when you go to market your product that no one knows about yet, that or hopefully they'll learn a lot more about from this podcast, but how what's your marketing focus? How are you getting the word out about what you do, and what's been the most successful campaign so far that's helped you get traction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will take a step back and say that we have a couple different business lines and business models. We also have, kind of the first layer of our business was provide, and still will be in the future, providing data to government, which is a totally different set of, sales channels and business models to do that. But when it comes to, getting better information in the hands of growers so that they can make better decisions. Cause let me just, get something real clear right up the bat, we're satellite data people, we're never, ever going to know more about, farming tomatoes than, your tomato farmer. So we're not in the business to tell anyone how to do their job. We're in the business of giving everyone the best information and tools that we can so that they can do their job better. And so that's kind of the first, thing I just wanted to make clear. But really for us, it comes down to partnerships. When you think about, and I try to put myself in the shoes of, the customer. So your tomato farmer as an example, they don't need even if I am from Wyoming, they don't need a satellite tech entrepreneur showing up on their door, with a demo, saying, hey, have you thought about satellite data? Because again, no one cares about where the data comes from. Nobody
Right.
cares about the satellite. They want to know, okay, how can I grow more food on this land, and how can I reduce my costs, right? And so for us, it's about partnering wisely with those, 5 to 6 to 7 people that farmer is interacting with on a monthly or quarterly or maybe weekly basis anyway in their, day-to-day work. So that farmer's getting fertilizer from somewhere. That farmer's getting crop protection from somewhere. That farmer's getting seed from somewhere. That farmer, has service people are coming out and installing that center pivot irrigation equipment and giving them, a interface to, manage that remotely. And so our go-to-market strategy is all about leveraging those 5 to 10, people that farmer is already interacting with to help them, and really leveraging partnerships with those 5 to 10 people per farmer to get the word out and get our tool, our information into the hands of the farmer. So we're not going to be reinventing any wheels. There's already people that the farmers are trusting, relying on for inputs, and so it's very natural for those people to show up with, hey, actually, in addition to your seed per chem, here's a tool that can help you save electricity or save water. Totally non-competitive with the core business of that dealer of selling fertilizer, chemical, or seed. But also gives them another touch point to, help and work with that farmer on a daily basis. Kind of a win-win-win for everybody. We win because we get our product out. Farmer wins because, they're more productive and hopefully are saving costs along the way. And then that dealer wins because, they are providing yet another source of value to their customer. And it might be about differentiated value that their competing dealer, isn't offering. And so that's really our strategy in terms of, getting the word out and getting our product in the hands of the customer.
That's great. Yeah. Partnerships are a way a lot of the big companies, if you look at Amazon, 20% of the revenue comes from partnerships and a lot of big companies. So it's, I think, a really good strategy. Every company that we've worked with has gone through a pivot at some point. For you, what's been one pivot that's really had an impact on your company, whether it's been a left or right decision you had to make, but it has really been impactful for you, something you remember and something that you've grown from?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a little bit of a difficult one, but I think this is right in their founder's journey. And so everyone's going to have their own set of challenges that, they have to work through. But one of the biggest kind of curveballs that we were thrown early on is one of our original co-founders, Jacob Bonzil, passed away. He was our original CTO. He was leading our company at the time. This was in 2020. And this was before we had, this was during the pandemic, but before we had closed that seed round. And he actually passed away unexpectedly of a heart attack. It was just one of those things that none of us saw coming. But really, really difficult, for us personally, but also for the business. Because you're in this, what do you do? Like, we never planned for that, type of thing. And you never think that, when you're dealing with your day-to-day problems of like, how are we going to get capital? How are we going to keep our, U.S. Air Force customer happy? How are we going to, do X, Y, and Z on our plan? You never think like, well, what happens if one of us, on this founding team isn't there anymore? And what do you do? And so that was a really surreal time for us. And I just remember kind of, getting that call that Jacob had passed. And so, you're everything slows down, but then it's like, okay, like what is the first thing that you do? And so the first thing I could think to do was like, oh, I got to call, this guy, Ryan, who's, lined up to be the lead investor in our financing round. So he was I think the first call I made, say, Ryan, this thing just happened. I just had to let you know, just wanted to tell you. Then next call, the Colonel Helfeld that we were working with at the U.S. Air Force, he was expecting, a team call, status update on our project, later that day. So called him on his cell phone. Hey, Colonel Helfeld, just so this thing happened. So, you kind of go through and you make all these, calls, and, you're not really thinking about at that point, the future of the company, what you're going to do next week, next year. It's like, okay, I just need to get through the day, right? I just need to tell everybody. But then, then you, like, I think it was later that weekend, we actually had time to kind of process and grieve, because this is, again, co-founders, like a family member. This is someone, this is on your proverbial top, your fave 5 on your phone, right? This is the person, one of the people you talk to every single day, for years. And so, it was tough for us emotionally. But what we found was, like, all those calls that we made, in that first hour, like, all those people, like, showed up for us. All those people, called us back, the next day, the day after that, just to check in on us and see, do you need anything? How you guys doing? How you holding up? And out of that, support, that guy, Ryan, that first call I made, he ended up still giving us, several months later, first term sheet, for our seed round, He didn't end up leading it, but he ended up investing, in the company alongside the group, Cultivation Capital, that did lead. Ryan ended up joining our board as an advisor, and has been a great mentor, for us, me personally, and for the company. But it's because, he didn't give up on us, and he showed up like, next day, the following day, hey, what do you need? How are you guys doing? How can I help? And so for him, he actually introduced us to our current CTO, because then, okay, not only did we lose our friend, but we just lost our chief technology officer. We're a satellite company. Like, what do you do? Like, how are we gonna build products or customers, let alone fundraise, when we've got this big, now gaping hole in our team as well? And so, out of that, Ryan connected us with a guy that he had worked with at a previous company, also in the satellite space, another commercial remote sensing company, that had been his CTO. And he made that introduction. He set that up and pitched us to our current CTO, and really, made that connection happen, and helped us, bring on our current CTO. And that's where, when we kind of talk about a pivot, that was a huge pivotal time for us, because, 6 months after this tragedy, we had a new CTO that had, a great set of, commercial space experience and, way of doing things, and kind of injected, some new thinking for us and for our team. That really changed our company. I mean, didn't change our vision, didn't change our mission, anything we wanted to do. But our new CTO, Scott, who we've been working with ever since, phenomenal part of our, executive team, leadership team, has really made a mark on, what the Hydrosat product from a satellite perspective, from a data perspective, looks like. And, it came out of this, very uncertain and very kind of tragic experience that we went through. And it was, with that, new team, and that, with, new CTO on board, that we ended up closing that first round of seed funding.
Wow.
When at a time when, 6 months earlier, it looked like, it was very uncertain times for us. So I just share that story because, every single founder, it goes through some moment or some series of moments like that. It may not be death, it may not be that, visible in the extreme, but in terms of that uncertainty of like, I was just presented with something that I didn't anticipate, and it's really, has a chance to knock us off here. Every founder deals with, multiple of those on their journey. And so that's why I just got to say, like, you've got to really love it. You've got to really, show up the next day anyway, and, stick it out, because there's going to be those times. It may not be the actual heart attack that, hits, but it's going to be something, and it's going to knock you back. And so, that's just part of the founder journey. And every entrepreneur that, sticks it out, and quote unquote makes it, whatever we're defining that as, has gone through those, and has, decided to show up the next day anyway, and keep on at it. And so that's a common thread, I think, for every founder.
Yeah. Now, Peter, thanks for sharing that. I know that's not just a pivot, but it's a personal pivot where, people are critically important to a company, especially the founders. So you don't ever want to think about replacing somebody that you love, that is doing a great job, that's part of your team. And then when you have to do it, can you find the right person? Can you collectively pull it together and keep doing what you have to do? And then who's going to step up? At some point, maybe you have to do something different. And so I think you have to, in some ways, maybe become a different leader. And also you learn from your past, but then you become more battle tested. It's just, pivots are so hard. It's nothing that you want to go through, but when you come out the other end, what you've learned and you can apply oftentimes can make the difference of your success. And I think it's it's really important to go through them. Unfortunately, you don't want to do it. And we're all going through them all the time. You wake up one day and like you said, something changes and, you get that pit in the bottom of your stomach where, what do I do now? And you have to figure out a way. You got to face the fears and get it done. So it's really cool that you're able to do that. I love your story. I love the product. I love the mission behind it. And one of the things I just want to share, and then I'm going to ask just one last question to you, is that, there was a study in the 1990s from two professors out of Stanford, and they were studying 200 startups. And those startups were talking about what made one company succeed versus the other. And there's three ways that these companies would hire people. One of them was, they call it the smart, I think I'm going to paraphrase this here, the SMART process, or the STAR process, which was to hire star players that really were winners. They always did their job and they did it really well. The second one was more of a professional hire, which was they knew their job, they did their job, but that's kind of all they did as long as they, felt like they could deliver, but they weren't as engaged with the company. They weren't behind the mission or the vision. And the third one was the commitment hire, which was they had the same shared values as the founders and the mission and the belief of what you were doing, as well as there was a bond that they formed with the employees. Call it love, call it whatever you want to call it. The companies that succeeded were the ones that had the commitment hires that were much more engaged with the purpose of the company, significantly more successful. And then when the dot bomb came in 2000, where a lot of the companies went under, the ones that succeeded were the commitment hired companies, but they were also 3 times more successful in going public. So when companies hire, it's important to know your culture, what you stand for, what you're about, what type of people would believe in what you're doing and want to be part of that mission, because those are the ones that are going to give you an advantage that you can't see it. But as you add more people to the team and you're all kind of integrated, you push through moments where you need to. And when you have pivots as a company, you come together. And that's something that we see it too. I mean, we've worked with hundreds of companies, but it's the ones that you can just tell they have a better relationship amongst each other. And that's part of it. So I'm going to send you that study after this, just so you have it.
Please do.
You can go through it. I think it'll be helpful for you and for our listeners too. We'll post it. Anyway, last question for you. What would be something you can share with inspiring entrepreneurs that maybe haven't quite taken that step? They're thinking about going after their dream, but they just haven't gone there yet. What would you share with them?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I love this question. And this is one that, I love, anyone to listen. I love sharing my thoughts on this one because it's really what inspired me to take that leap initially. And it's really inspired me to take every single leap thereafter, with the business and in my personal life too. So don't think about, the risk of, what will happen if I try this thing, put myself out there and I fail, right? So many people approach problems, whether it's, just problem in life or whether, it's starting a business around that, what will happen if I fail, and what will I have lost? What will I give up, by putting myself out there and taking that risk? And I really think that's the wrong way to think about it. And what got me to take the plunge with Hydrosat is I was thinking about, okay, like, what if I do? What if I do take this risk, and what if it fails miserably? What will my life be like? And I thought about it, and I thought I kind of came to the realization that even if it didn't work out and it failed spectacularly, I still would have learned a ton, learned way more, met some really interesting people, met some really phenomenal people, and ultimately would be in a better place, personally, professionally, even trying and failing than if I had just stayed in my existing job, which was safe, and I liked, and it was comfortable. And I realized, I was like, well, it's not the risk of like what would happen if I take this leap. It's what will I not have? What will I give up? What's the opportunity cost of what's missed out on if I stay, if I don't, take that leap? And when you look at the problem that way, you have a totally different frame of reference on it. And so, I would just say to like every, person out there is listening that's thinking about starting a business, I would just think about like, go for it. Because if you don't start that business, you risk losing out on all that upside and all that gain, that knowledge, experience, people, and hopefully at the end of the day, a big pile of money. But like, even if you don't get that, like you're going to get that knowledge, people you'll meet, experiences that you never would have had otherwise. And so, I think about it that way. It's like, what do you risk by not going and taking that leap? And so when you think about whether it's starting a new business or, applying for promotion or, moving across the world to, follow love or whatever it is that, you're scared to do, like, what's the opportunity? Like, what's the risk I take by not taking that leap? Because if I take the leap, maybe it doesn't work out, but I probably still will have learned a lot about myself. I probably still will have met great people, and I will have a great set of experiences to take with me to do whatever else I'm going to do in life. And so, that was the frame of mind I was in when I started Hydrosat. And man, I just, if there's someone out there that's thinking about starting a business, just think about that. And then, just go do it. Just go try, take the risk. Even if it fails, you'll still wind up ahead.
I love it. Thanks for sharing that. Really inspiring. Before we wrap up here, if someone wants to find you, might want to work for you, where would they find Hydrosat?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we got a website, hydrosat.com. We're not playing any games there. You can find us right online, or on LinkedIn. I'd say LinkedIn's a great way to find us and reach out. We are hiring, always looking for good people, and always just looking for, good people to support us too, to cheer us on, to, make those virtuous connections, and provide us support along the way. So if you want to get involved, if you want to join our mission, awesome. If you just want to, send us a like every now and again, and a positive thought through the universe, we'll take that too. But really, really happy to connect with anybody.
That's great. Well, Pieter, thanks so much for joining us here today, and all of our listeners that are listening. It means the world to us that you're spending your time with us as well. We'll look forward to hearing about you in the future, Pieter, and certainly love to catch up with you as you grow in your company, and we will catch up in some time soon. So anyway.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jake. Really, really appreciate it.
Before we wrap up, I want to give a big shout out to all the entrepreneurs that have joined to make this podcast possible, and for all the listeners for listening. It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time with us today. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to connect with you all soon on the next episode. Take care. This show is sponsored by Match Relevant, a company that helps venture-backed startups find the best people in the market, and they do it in 3 simple steps. First, they sit down with founders to understand their story. Second, they tell their story into multiple candidate channels. And third, they schedule interviews within 48 hours. Find us at matchrelevant.com to learn more about how we do it.